In February of 2012, German tax authorities, armed with a search warrant, entered a modest and cluttered apartment in a quiet, respectable neighborhood of Munich. They were investigating a reclusive elderly man named Cornelius Gurlitt who had no official job, no pension, no bank accounts, and had never paid taxes, yet seemed to travel to Switzerland with large amounts of cash. The authorities were expecting to find financial records, perhaps some hidden money, but as they began to sift through the squalor, past towering stacks of old newspapers and cans of expired food, they found a hidden, professionally built secret room, and when they shone their flashlights inside, they were met with a sight that would stun the art world and unearth a dark, toxic legacy from the era of the Third Reich. They found a breathtaking, long-lost treasure trove of over 1,400 masterpieces by artists like Picasso, Monet, Chagall, and Renoir, a collection valued at over $1 billion. This was the beginning of the incredible story of the Gurlitt hoard, a mystery that would reveal how one family managed to hide a king's ransom of stolen and degenerate art in plain sight for over 70 years. But before we start our story, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any of our new, incredible stories. To understand the secret hidden in that Munich apartment, we must first travel back to the dark heart of the 20th century, Nazi Germany. When Adolf Hitler came to power, he sought to control not just the political and military life of Germany, but its cultural and artistic soul as well. Hitler, himself a failed artist, had a very rigid and classical taste in art. He despised the modern art movements that had flourished in Germany in the 1920s – Expressionism, Cubism, Dadaism. He saw this art as sick, chaotic, and un-German. In his twisted ideology, it was the product of a degenerate culture, which he blamed on Jewish and Bolshevik influences. He launched a full-scale war on modern art. In 1937, his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, organized a massive and infamous exhibition in Munich called the Entartet Kunst, or the Degenerate Art Exhibition. This was not a celebration of art, it was a public shaming. Over 650 modern paintings and sculptures by artists who are now considered masters like Paul Klee, Wassily Kandinsky, and Marc Chagall were confiscated from German museums and then deliberately hung poorly in cramped rooms. The exhibition was designed to ridicule the art and to turn the public against it. It was a stunning success for the Nazis, attracting over 2 million visitors. Following the exhibition, the Nazi regime began a systematic purge. They confiscated over 20,000 works of modern art. The Nazis, ever pragmatic, realized that this degenerate art was highly valued outside of Germany. They decided to sell it on the international market to raise much-needed foreign currency for their growing war machine. But this was only one part of the Nazis' vast campaign of artistic plunder. As they began their conquest of Europe, a special military unit called the ERR was tasked with the systematic looting of art from museums and, most particularly, from Jewish collectors and families in the occupied territories. It was the largest art theft in human history. Hundreds of thousands of priceless paintings, sculptures, and tapestries were stolen and shipped back to Germany, destined for the grand Führer Museum that Hitler planned to build in his hometown of Linz, or for the private collections of high-ranking Nazi officials like Hermann Göring. To manage this colossal enterprise of selling degenerate art and laundering looted treasures, the Nazis needed experts. They needed men with an intimate knowledge of the art world, men who could tell a masterpiece from a fake, and who were willing to make a deal with the devil. One of these men was a brilliant, complex, and morally ambiguous art historian named Hildebrand Gurlitt. Hildebrand Gurlitt was a respected figure in the German art world of the 1920s. He was the director of a museum and a passionate champion of modern, degenerate art. He was everything the Nazis despised, and to make matters worse, he was considered one-quarter Jewish under the Nuremberg laws, which cost him his job. He was, by all accounts, a victim of the Nazi regime, but Hildebrand was also a survivor, a shrewd opportunist. He used his vast knowledge and his international contacts to make himself indispensable to the very regime that had cast him out. In 1940, he became one of the 4 official art dealers authorized by Goebbels to buy and sell the confiscated degenerate art. He traveled across Europe using his position to acquire art for Hitler's planned museum and to sell other pieces for the Nazi war effort. But under the cover of his official duties, Hildebrand was also secretly building his own massive private collection. He exploited Jewish collectors who were desperately trying to flee Europe, often buying priceless masterpieces from them for a fraction of their worth or trading their art for exit visas. He was both a connoisseur and a predator, a man who loved modern art and who profited from its persecution. When the war ended and Germany was in ruins, Hildebrand Gurlitt was investigated by the Allied forces' Monuments Men, the team tasked with recovering the millions of looted artworks. But Gurlitt was clever. He portrayed himself as a victim, a man who had been persecuted for his Jewish ancestry and his love of modern art. He claimed that his vast private collection, which he had stored at his family home, had been completely destroyed in the catastrophic Allied firebombing of Dresden in 1945. It was a lie. He had hidden the collection in a remote castle. The Monuments Men, overwhelmed and with limited evidence, believed his story and cleared him. Hildebrand Gurlitt had successfully laundered his collection and his dark past. After his death in a car crash in 1956, the entire secret collection, this toxic legacy, was passed down to his quiet, reclusive, and deeply devoted son, Cornelius. And for the next 60 years, Cornelius Gurlitt would become the silent, invisible guardian of this ghost-like treasure. Our story now jumps to September 22, 2010. An elderly, nervous-looking man is sitting on a train traveling from Zurich, Switzerland to Munich, Germany. German customs officials are conducting a routine random check for undeclared cash. They approach the old man, who is sweating profusely. His name is Cornelius Gurlitt. In his pocket, they find an envelope containing 9,000 euros in crisp banknotes. This was not a crime, as it was just under the 10,000 euro limit that required a declaration. But it was highly suspicious. Who was this elderly man with no declared income who was carrying so much cash across the border? The discovery was enough to trigger a quiet, long-term tax evasion investigation by the German authorities. For the next 2 years, they secretly monitored him, building a case. Finally, in February of 2012, armed with a search warrant, the investigators arrived at his modest apartment in the Schwabing district of Munich. They were expecting to find financial records, perhaps more hidden cash. The door opened, revealing a frail, reclusive old man and an apartment filled with clutter and the smell of decay. They were about to step inside and uncover the greatest lost art discovery of the 21st century. As the German investigators stepped into Cornelius Gurlitt's apartment, they were met with a scene of profound squalor and neglect. The air was stale and thick with the smell of decay. The rooms were a chaotic maze of clutter, with towering stacks of yellowed newspapers, old books, and precarious piles of empty food cans and expired goods that reached the ceiling. It was the home of a man who had clearly cut himself off from the outside world for a very long time. As they began the methodical and unpleasant task of sifting through the mess, searching for financial documents, one of the officers noticed that a small, dark back room had no windows and seemed to be completely filled, floor to ceiling, with junk. But as they started to remove the piles of trash in that room, they discovered that behind it all was not a wall, but a professionally installed hidden partition. Behind this partition lay a secret. It was a tall, custom-built wooden rack, the kind used in a professional art gallery's storage vault, filled with dozens of large, framed canvases. The investigators shone their flashlights onto the first canvas. They had stumbled upon a treasure trove of incalculable value. The search for tax records was instantly forgotten, replaced by the stunning realization that they had uncovered one of the greatest lost art collections of the 20th century. In total, they would find 1,406 works of art, all hidden in the squalor of this small Munich apartment and a second property Gurlitt owned in Salzburg, Austria. The authorities carefully confiscated the entire collection, leaving Cornelius Gurlitt, now an old man, alone in his empty, silent apartment, his life's sole purpose and his only companions now gone. What followed was a period of extraordinary secrecy. For over a year and a half, the German government kept the discovery of the Gurlitt hoard a complete secret from the public. The billion-dollar collection was stored in a secure warehouse, while a small team of experts began the daunting task of cataloging it. Then, in November of 2013, the German news magazine Focus broke the story. The news exploded into a global sensation. The art world was electrified. Historians were stunned, and for the families and descendants of Jewish collectors whose art had been stolen by the Nazis, The news was a bombshell, a sudden and unexpected glimmer of hope that their long-lost family treasures might finally be found. The discovery of the Gurlitt hoard was not just an art story. It instantly became a profound moral and legal crisis. The central, agonizing question was, who was the rightful owner of these paintings? The case was a legal and ethical quagmire. Under German law, the statute of limitations for theft was 30 years, a period that had long since passed. This meant that, legally, Cornelius Gurlitt could potentially be the rightful owner of many of the works, even those that had been stolen. Furthermore, the task of tracing the ownership history, or provenance, each painting held a secret history, a story of creation, ownership, and often tragic loss. Under immense international pressure, the German government established the Schwabing Art Trove Task Force, an international team of experts tasked with researching the provenance of every single artwork in the collection. For Cornelius Gurlitt, the discovery and the subsequent media firestorm were a devastating blow. In his own mind, he was not a criminal. He was the devoted custodian of his father's legacy. He had lived his entire life as a ghost, selling a single painting only when he desperately needed cash, traveling to Switzerland to do so because it was the only life he had ever known. He had never committed a crime, yet he was now at the center of a global scandal. In his own words, the only thing he had ever loved were his paintings. After a long period of resistance, he finally agreed to cooperate with the task force and abide by the Washington Principles, an international agreement that calls for the return of Nazi-looted art to the heirs of its original owners. Then, in 2014, came the final, shocking twist in the story. Cornelius Gurlitt, the man who had lived his entire life in the shadows as the guardian of a toxic secret, passed away at the age of 81, and when his will was read, it contained one last surprise. He had bequeathed his entire billion-dollar collection not to Germany, not to his own relatives, but to a small, relatively obscure museum, the Museum of Fine Arts in Bern, Switzerland. The museum was stunned. After a period of intense deliberation, they accepted the controversial inheritance, vowing to honor Gurlitt's agreement and to continue the painstaking work. The story of the Gurlitt hoard is far more than a simple treasure hunt. It is a powerful and painful reminder of the long, dark shadow of the Nazi era and the ongoing, difficult struggle for justice for the victims of the Holocaust. The discovery of this lost collection, hidden by a lonely man for over half a century, has forced a new generation to confront the uncomfortable questions of collaboration, profit, and the moral responsibility of inheriting a tainted legacy. The work of the researchers continues to this day, and with each new piece of provenance they uncover, another small piece of a great historical injustice is, hopefully, made right.